Hi, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Mustafa Jimale. I am the policy manager at the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, otherwise known as BAJI. Thank you so much for making time today to join our webinar on Trump's latest Muslim and African ban. Let's see here. Yeah, and then you can follow us on social media. On Twitter, we're at Baji Tweet. And on Facebook, you can look us up. It's facebook.com/Baji page. And then on Instagram, we are at Insta Baji. And so just a couple of housekeeping rules. If you have any technical issues, you can email my colleague Emanuela at baji.org. We invite you to submit all of your questions for presenters through the chat. We definitely have two different sections in this webinar where folks can ask their questions. And if time permits, we can have a discussion and next steps, or folks on the webinar can share what they are working on. So that's me. I'm going to be your moderator tonight. And then I'll let my colleague Emanuela introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Emanuela. I'm the operations manager here with Baji. If you, as Mustafa has already mentioned, if you have any questions or concerns with your technical issues with the webinar, please let me know. My email is just my first name at baji.org. And also just make sure that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can use the raise hand method on Zoom, or you can go ahead and type in your question in the chat box, whichever is easier for you. And thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah, thank you, Emanuela. And today we're joined by three wonderful guests, and I will introduce them here. We have Subha with the No Muslim Ban Ever campaign, who's a legal fellow and a legal and outreach fellow. Subha, do you mind introducing yourself quickly?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Subha Varadarajan, and the No Muslim Ban Ever campaign is a project of Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus, CAIR-SF Bay Area, National Immigration Law Center, and Empower Change.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
And also tonight we're joined by Jaylani Hussein, who's the Executive Director of CAIR Minnesota. Jaylani, do you want to introduce yourself? And if you're talking, Jaylani, you may be on mute.
Oh, I've been unmuted now. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
All right. This is Jaylani Hussein from CAIR Minnesota. It's really an honor to be with all of you, and thank you for joining the call. I'm obviously one of these immigrant community members who's also impacted, originally from Somalia, and really have seen and experienced from a community leader perspective just the wide impact of this ban from a personal level, but also from a community-wide perspective.
Wonderful, thank you, Jaylani. And we are also joined by Manar at the ACLU. They are the Senior Legislative and Advocacy Counsel. Manar, you mind saying a few words?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mustafa, and thanks to Baji for organizing this and having me on it. My name is Manar Waheed. I am the Senior Legislative and Advocacy Counsel at the ACLU in our national office in Washington, D.C. I lead our work impacting Muslim, Arab, Middle Eastern, Iranian, South Asian communities on a variety of issues, from immigration to national security and counterterrorism, hate crimes, and a little bit of free speech as it relates to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. But more importantly for this, I lead our work on the Muslim ban, the bans that have connected to it, and now this most recent ban that is targeting Africans in particular.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Manar. And so we'll actually jump right into this. Manar is going to provide us an overview of the Trump administration's latest Muslim African ban, which is a continuation, as you all know, of his xenophobic and racist immigration framework that he's been doing since day one. Manar is going to provide us an overview of this ban and then give some overview of like best practices as it relates to knowing your rights, and in case you are you confront Custom Border Protections or other law enforcement agencies.
Yeah, so thank you for that and for that framing. I mean, I'll start by saying I think everyone on this webinar knows that on January 31st, just not even a month ago, though it feels like a lifetime already, Trump expanded his original Muslim ban, targeting more Black and brown people, and adding 6 additional countries in there, and particularly adding African countries in there, though there were some already in the first Muslim ban as well. So the new ban went into effect last Friday, February 21st, like early that morning, 12:01 a.m. Friday morning, though we started to hear cases of folks getting held upon entry to the U.S. a couple of hours before that, because this administration doesn't waste any time in their hatred. And so we are now up to 13 countries in the bans. I'm gonna talk specifically about the ban that was implemented last Friday, the expanded ban, but I wanna take a step back just so folks have a picture of how we got here. So I'm sure most folks remember the first ban that was issued Trump's first week as president, when folks showed up at the airports and really showed a level of outrage that I had not anticipated, demanding for people to be let into the country, and in particular in that moment, Muslims to be let into the country and refugees to be let into the country. He went through a few iterations of his ban to try to get it clean enough to pass muster in the court. And the unfortunate reality is in December of that year, December 4th of 2017, the Supreme Court let him implement his Muslim ban while it was still deciding its case. So for, over 2 years now, we've had a Muslim ban that currently, where that first ban is that it impacts certain applicants from Iran, North Korea, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and Venezuela. And North Korea and Venezuela are obviously like on the margins with not a high number of people impacted, and are more superficial in that way, addition to the ban. And of course, these are a lot of Black and brown countries, which is no surprise with this administration. Chad was on an earlier version of that implemented ban and is no longer on that ban. And so what happened was, the Supreme Court ended up issuing their decision that allowed the ban to remain in effect in June of 2018. And since then, we've seen the asylum ban, we've seen the healthcare restriction ban, and then most recently, we've seen this ban be implemented that has expanded the Muslim ban and targets African countries in particular. And so I say that to say that we got here because this government continues to abuse its authority under immigration laws to implement policies filled with hatred. And the targets of that are often Black and brown people, if not exclusively Black and brown people with this administration. And so as they get emboldened by the courts, they use these in more and more destructive ways. And I think we've seen a lot of those already in 2020. So now to talk just a little bit more in detail about what this latest ban does. So it's a little bit different than the previous Muslim ban in that it targets specifically people with immigrant visas. And what that means is it's people that are coming to the US with the intention of staying here and becoming citizens through whatever path they come on, right? Which is the quote immigrant visa path as compared to the non-immigrant visas that are more, might be like coming for a short period of time on a business visa or a tourist visa. These are people often coming to be with their families. So it might be a spouse, it might be a fiance, but there are people that have a pathway to citizenship. And so for them to claim that, you know, for security reasons or information sharing with these other governments, it's somehow okay for non-immigrants staying for a shorter period of time to come, but not for immigrants, actually doesn't make any sense and is quite illogical. In any case, the only exception on there are 4 countries who are banned from immigrant visas, with the exception of what are called special immigrant visas, which are a particular type of visa that relates to having helped the US government. All other immigrant visas, meaning people who are coming to eventually become citizens here, that have a pathway to becoming citizens. People from Eritrea, Kyrgyzstan, Myanmar, and Nigeria are banned under as of last Friday. And then people from Sudan and Tanzania are banned from the diversity lottery program, which is a program that has been around for a number of years, that has been the target of many attacks by this administration and attempts to get rid of it. And it is a program that was essentially created to provide opportunities to people in countries that may not have a path to an employment visa here or a family-related immigrant visa here. And so that is who they're targeting, is people without a lot of other options, and they've gone after Sudan and Tanzania in this context. So that's kind of where we are right now. I would say that for folks who are applying, for folks who have family members or friends that are applying, there is a waiver process. I'm sure that folks have heard about this process. There are 3 criteria for the waiver. One is, and all 3 of them must be proven. One is that not coming to the US, for that applicant to not be able to come to the US would cause undue hardship. The second is for that person to come to the US, it would not be a, quote, national security or public safety threat to the United States. And then the third that has to be met is that it would be in the national interest of the United States for that person to come here. We've, you know, in the context of the Muslim ban, we've seen waivers granted in pretty small numbers. There's not a lot of them. There's not a clear process for how they are being decided. There's no form to fill out. So there are a variety of resources that I'm happy to share with folks who are on this webinar in terms of how to make a request for a waiver. The government has said that people should make their request for a waiver during their interview or email or mail their request for a waiver to the consular office if it's already in its administrative process. But folks should definitely talk to lawyers before doing that, if they can, to kind of put their best foot forward on that. Just because I feel like it's hanging out there, I also want to say there has not been litigation filed at this point. It is my understanding that there will be litigation filed. Organizations, including the ACLU, are still kind of evaluating that option. The Supreme Court decision from 2018, you know, while it didn't decide the full merits of the case, didn't put us in a great position to be able to win at the lower court levels, even filing more urgently. And so we're also trying to be careful about not giving folks hope of being able to stop something. But litigation options are very likely to be pursued shortly, I think. I'll stop there.
Yeah, Manar, can you talk a little bit about the waiver process? And sorry, you already talked about the waiver process, but the likelihood of getting a waiver. Through our experiences at Baji, it's just been very difficult for the folks who have contacted us directly, who attempt to get a waiver. It's almost as if they have to run a campaign, you know, reach out to their Congress, hire a lawyer, and do this thing. You mind talking about the likelihood of a waiver and like what the folks' odds are?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit a lot of it, Mustafa. I mean, it is you know, it is a very difficult process of the times that we have actually, like, we do have numbers that members of Congress have gotten from the government that show that there have been an increase in the number of waivers, but the numbers are still in the grand scheme of how many people are impacted by this, we're talking about millions and millions of people impacted by this, right? And in the grand scheme of that, it's very small numbers. And you're absolutely right that like sometimes there are full-on campaigns that have to be launched with all this public engagement when people are literally dying, seeking healthcare treatment or trying to be with someone in their family that is dying. And, you know, it's hard to know what works with this administration. It's hard to know when a claim is enough for them. It doesn't feel like the criteria, you know, it feels quite arbitrary in terms of like words like national security or public safety threat have historically been used against often Black and brown communities. And so it's the things that it's not to say that there haven't been times when waivers have been granted, but you're absolutely right that sometimes it's a full-on campaign. And so chances are not great in that we're not seeing a high number of them, even when, you know, folks seem to meet this criteria.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Thank you for that explanation. And Manar, do you mind just going over, like, a lot of our members, you know, have been impacted by this ban since the first iteration. And, you know, there was a lot of energy around that. The initial ban, protests, legal services provided, and whatnot. Do you mind just going over a little bit about best practices for folks who encounter custom border protection or whose loved ones do, what they should do, what they should consider, like reaching out to lawyers or things like that?
Yeah. So I think for folks that are coming to the U.S. that are impacted by the ban that are coming on visa. So obviously, folks that are just traveling, maybe back and forth out of the country for any reason, who are U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens and green card holders have different rights coming back into the country and encountering CBP than folks on visas, in the sense that, like, if you are a U.S. citizen or you have a green card, you have a right to be let into the country in quite a different way, right? And so the questions that you're supposed to be asked, and I bring this up also because of some of what we've seen with Iranians being targeted at airports over the last 2 months. So Iranians have been getting inappropriate questioning by CBP for quite some time. If you are a U.S. citizen or an LPR, and I can share some of these, our Know Your Rights materials on this as well. If you're a U.S. citizen or an LPR, you're going to have the things that CBP is able to question you about are your citizenship or LPR status, like to prove that you actually do have the status you say you have, and then whether or not you have contraband, so things related to your luggage. All the other questions that we have seen asked about religious beliefs, political beliefs, all of those things are not appropriate questions and are First Amendment violations, because that is those are your constitutional rights, and you should not be questioned about them coming back to the place where you are a resident. What we have seen is people be held for many, many hours as a result, though, and then there's also pieces related to folks' cell phones being searched, which, while you're not obligated to turn over your cell phones, we have seen, you know, it's a decision-making moment, right? In that people have to weigh the pros and cons, also how they feel with it being questioned. You don't have to turn over your cell phone. If you do, then if you don't, though, you might be held for an extended period of time, and we've also seen them confiscate cell phones. So I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I just wanted folks to have that information. For people coming on visas, it's different because they don't necessarily have a right to enter the United States. And so that the questioning becomes much broader. That doesn't mean they should be questioned about political beliefs or religious beliefs either. But the questioning becomes much broader because they can be denied entry in a different way. So a couple of things that I would just suggest for folks that are coming and going from the U.S. or are just have family or friends or someone you know who's a student that's coming over, is to talk to, if you yourself are worried about your travel, I would suggest talking to a lawyer just to get a sense of what your rights are, and I can also send around some of our Know Your Rights materials. For people coming on visas in particular, I would suggest that there is a list of lawyers that a professor at Penn State put together to help with the Iranian students that have been denied entry and deported recently, that I think a lot of that list can extend to more individuals. And then there is kind of like a crisis response type of attorney situation list that our Iranian partner organizations have put together. And I think those communities the Iranian communities have unfortunately been dealing with this for the last three years. So they have a network that I think can also be helpful to other communities as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Manar. And so now we'll just take a pause, and if you have any questions about what has been presented so far, or if you have any questions about your rights around this is the time to ask. Let's see. And so what you can do is you can submit a question in the chat options. Otherwise, you can raise your hand, and then I can unmute you and you can ask your question. Emanuela, you mind reading the Q&A?
Yes, no problem. So we have a question, and the first question is, student visas are exempt from this policy?
So great questions. So for the most recent version of the ban, the expanded ban that impacts certain people from Eritrea, Kyrgyzstan, Myanmar, Nigeria, Sudan, and Tanzania, student visas are not included in that. For the other Muslim ban countries from before, it's a little bit different, but I will note, just for folks to be aware of that Iran, which has been on the first ban, which has been on the ban since the beginning, student visas are exempted from the Muslim ban, and yet we are seeing students very much impacted coming to the US. So not to say that, I just want people to be cautious and know that there are broader implications here in terms of how CBP does their job.
Okay, and the other question is about the slides, okay. And the other question is, does the No Ban Act include all itinerants of the Muslim travel bans? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, I know that Subha is going to get to the No Ban Act, but the short answer to that is yes.
Okay. And I think that's it. Everything else was about the slides. And also, someone did ask, how can we get access to the list of lawyers just described?
Yeah, so if this works for you, Mustafa, I can send you some of our Know Your Rights, and I can also, I'm sure you have it in your email as well, but I can pull that list of lawyers and send it over to you as well to share.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much, Manar. Thank you for that presentation. And now we'll move over to Jaylani. Oh, let's see. Jaylani Hussein with CAIR Minnesota, who's going to provide us an overview of how the Muslim ban has impacted Muslims and Africans since the first iteration. And Jaylani, I just put together this slide with a couple of different images. One, of course, as you know, was the Bring Abdi Home campaign. Abdi was a Somali national who was impacted by the first iteration of the Muslim ban, who was detained at JFK and held in New Jersey. Abdi had a green card and was supposed to be reunited with his wife and daughter, but unfortunately was detained and deteriorated in custody, and eventually was released after a very aggressive advocacy campaign. And to your left is a Somali couple who has a similar story. This individual's husband was also separated and eventually reunited. So, and then of course, on the upper right, we have Jaylani at a press conference speaking about the impact of the Muslim ban.
Thanks, Mustafa. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I mean, you know, just to take us back to that January, I think the biggest, perhaps the one thing that continues to be a big challenge and is the what this impact meant to anyone who felt that they somehow were impacted by this ban. I remember within the first 6 months, I traveled across the entire state of Minnesota and visited, you know, close to 30 to 40 Islamic centers, and mainly in rural Minnesota. And there was one question that continued to repeat, and that question was, should I carry my U.S. passport? These were citizens who were worried about that somehow this policy, which was aimed at stopping people from coming into the United States, would somehow also create this type of, you know, police state where they had to tell that they were not, or they were citizens. The number of people, particularly in Minnesota, who left Minnesota to Canada. There was you know, a number of people that did that. In fact, there was a gentleman from Wilmer, Minnesota, who met me at the mosque, and he came with one of his friends, and he shared with me that he was staying at a neighbor's house, even though I think his 2 children and his wife were there, and apparently he had a clear path to citizenship. He had an asylum case that was pending. He had an attorney, and he said that his attorney was, in fact, supportive of him, but he was concerned. He was concerned somehow somebody knew, and in the middle of the night somebody was going to come. So he stayed at a neighbor's house. This gentleman eventually went to Canada, even though he had a clear path to being a citizen. And so, you know, the impact was pretty wide, and obviously the number of people that are still waiting for their relatives. You know, I get those. And I'm one of the few Somali known, you know, civil rights leaders across the country, and so people share my information with others, and I daily and sometimes, you know, every other week I will get a message on Instagram, on Facebook from someone who's in Kenya or is in Somalia or somewhere who has a visa, who's been waiting for the United States to clear him to come, and want to know, you know, what is next, and is there news? Is there something that has changed? And to the people here who have relatives. I have my brother-in-law has recently married his wife in another country, and she can't come over. You know, so you know, I think, you know, the impact is pretty wide. Just even 3 weeks ago, I was speaking at an event or at a county meeting in St. Cloud, Minnesota, where the county was discussing about whether they should continue to welcome refugees, and it's one of the counties that has the most a very high refugee resettlement, and mainly because there's secondary migration because of the jobs in that area. But it's also one of the most racially highly tense area in Minnesota. And a gentleman came out to support refugee resettlement, and this older gentleman was carrying around a pouch of paperwork. So I just thought he just came out in support of, you know, the making sure that that this was something that you know, he's you know, just there. And then later on, as we were leaving, you know, he pulls out the form, and in the form is letters that you know, the state senators, the Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith and others have written to DHS about his son, who is he's been trying to reunify. So, you know, when you see that on a daily basis, you see how it impacts you, your family, and you see the psychological impact for those people who are U.S. citizens or somehow think this affects them. I think also the add-on, I think it's another big issue of the fact that, you know, with the Muslim ban, you know, being immigrants and being Black and being Muslim, those three elements, you know, play out very well in this racist policy as well, and that's why Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is the subject of so much attack. You know, we know that the president literally was saying go back home. You know, so in short, I would say I think we can keep going and how the impact is. And I think this latest extension of the ban and adding more African countries after the president has made clear statements about how he hates Africa and he wants refugees and immigrants apparently from Norway. You know, we know how racist this is. We know, and it's just really unfortunate that that we are in a time where our nation is and our courts are willing to accept a racist, xenophobic, and really just completely what I would consider to be such an un-American policy to stand. But I wanted to just uplift that, you know, there are hundreds of families and thousands of families who are worried, who are missing their loved ones. Just as you started off here, Mustafa, with both Abdi and his family and others. And we just have to keep continuing to remind people about these stories so that policies like the No Ban Act and others can actually fully be enacted.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jaylani. Do you mind touching on a little bit on how the community at large in Minnesota has responded and shown up for the Muslim folks who are directly impacted? And also what your organization and other organizations here have been able to do in terms of direct service or legal services that they've provided to folks who are directly impacted?
That's a good point. I think first of all, I would say that you know, the Minnesota, you know, we've seen a really strong support in the initial stage. I would say, particularly, you know, the community coming out in support. I think the administrations, both the state administrations, many leaders really rejecting this policy, and I think, you know, it's critical that that type of level of support continues. You know, I think the Minnesota has a really strong immigrant social justice network that is, you know, with Immigrant Law Center, Advocacy for Human Rights, a number of other groups that, and most recently, you know, groups like the Group Some Stuff is also in support of, so the Immigrant Collective and others. So I think there is a lot of resources being created. Minnesota obviously again has a very visible immigrant, Black immigrant population, obviously that many people are aware of. So I think immediately we saw a quick response, and there were a number of opportunities to help with different issues, whether stopping a plane that had 90 people that were about to be deported to Somalia, to, you know, many other major cases similar. Immediately after the ban was enacted, I think both senators here in the state of Minnesota were able to bring a young daughter, a young girl who was stuck in I think Tanzania. So we've had those little wins in here and there, and I think there's been a number of legal services and kind of legal clinics. What we have done at CAIR Minnesota is really to try to provide as much clear information as possible, and kind of triage what we can do and what the other legal entities have been doing, and continuing to provide really support and uplifting community around this issue and giving them an opportunity where they can, you know, just at least have hope in this difficult time right now. So I think continuing to provide accurate information to community members, and then also providing, obviously in this case, a limited immigration services, and then continuing to partner with our network of immigrant social justice groups here to continue to provide a wide range of legal services. And I'm proud to say the city of Minneapolis has actually hired an immigration attorney to support these demands. And I think St. Paul has done that. So on even a city level, starting to really address that, and they're playing a big role in trying to, again, continue to provide accurate information and consolidate immigration attorneys and support for individuals who are in need. Am I still there?
We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Did I? Okay.
Is there a particular website folks can go to connect with your organization?
Yeah, so CAIR Minnesota, CAIR, you know, as many of you know, we have about 35 chapters across the country. And so you could definitely go to CAIR Minnesota. It's CAIR-MN.com. And if you go on there right now, there's at least just a basic frequent asked questions about the ban and some limited information there about the extension, and also some resources. And then if you know, if you're in another state, you can definitely reach out to our CAIR network. We do have, each state has a little bit of different kind of support, but yes,